welcome to episode 88 of the Racing Line podcast. It's just Joey here this week, guys, to discuss what I think is the best weekend of supercars racing we've had up to date this year at the Ben Motorsport Park in South Australia. Where to begin other than the absolute dominance displayed by Brodie Kosteki this weekend? 3 wins out of 3 races. After returning this week from Indianapolis with SVG, I reckon most of his competitors would have hoped he had stayed, back in Indiana, because the demolition that he displayed this weekend really solidified himself as the man to catch in the championship hunt. But it was also compounded by the fact that the 3 closest rivals for him, SVG, Brock Feeney, and Will Brown, in some different ways, all had lackluster weekends, to say the least, and in the case of Will Brown and in some ways Brock Feeney as well, weekends to forget. None of those 3 even got a podium in the 3 races this weekend, and for Will Brown himself, I think there was one race he didn't finish. I think the race yesterday on the Sunday afternoon, he finished 14th, and that was all due to his own mistake. In really what was a week that was the Will Brown show leading up to the race weekend. He said he had been feeling confident and was feeling ready to race. And in the first race, I think it started in qualifying. To be honest, he just didn't put together a great qualifying session in any of the 3 qualifying sessions, and that put him in the back of the field in most of the races. In the first race, he was taken out, I think, corner 3. And his weekend didn't get much better going from there. And in what was an interesting week, it was announced, like I said earlier, that he was going to be moving to Triple Eight Racing. It was also confirmed within hours that Jack LeBrock would be taking his spot. And that has sort of kicked off somewhat of a silly season heading, after this round towards what I would suspect would be a few more we'd hear before Sandown. This morning it was confirmed that Davey Reynolds would not be re-signed at Penrite Racing, which is Grove Racing, and Nick Percat would not be continuing at Walkinshaw Andretti United either. It was then quickly followed up with the fact that Richie Sanaway would be picking up the drive that was vacated by Davey Reynolds, putting another Kiwi back on the grid, which is awesome for the championship, and another point that we'll get to later on as well. And that was, I think, what I thought would be the end of the surprises. It was also revealed that the championship will be returning back to New Zealand in 2024 to a new venue, one that I had never heard of before, and tell me if I'm saying this wrong, Taupo Motorsport Park, which is on the North Island. And from watching a bit of footage and seeing some flybys of the track and the amenities there, it is an awesome looking track. It is a place that the championship has really missed going to this year, and I think we as a championship is going to be better off for it next year. It also looks like a real destination sort of place to go. There's a lot of other activities in the general vicinity of the motorsport park, which is awesome for people coming from around New Zealand, but also people coming from across the ditch, I suppose. And there was the last bit of big news over the weekend this was actually last week, was the fact that the Sahin brothers, who are the owners of the Ben Motorsport Park and built it from scratch, had put in an offer to buy the Supercars Championship for an undisclosed price. This championship seems like it's up for sale, or people are bidding for it continuously. People are trying to, have their say in how the championship is to be run. Realistically, I think there's been a few people who are involved in trying to, get involved in the ownership of it, and I think they're all good ideas, as long as they have a passion for the sport, which everyone seems to have had. So we'll see where that takes us. But I think we'll keep going with the racing. And I think one point, other than the fact that how good Brodie was this weekend, was, from what it seems from the outset, it was a return to form for the Mustangs. If Brodie hadn't been so dominant, I think we would have been talking about how well Thomas Randall performed this weekend. Snagged his first pole, snagged his first solo podium. He got a 2nd and 2/3 this weekend, which is fantastic for him, for the Tickford group, his future as well. And then in terms of the rest of the Fords, there were on average 6 Fords finishing in the top 10 over the 3 races. The first race had 6, the second race had 5, and the third race had 7. There was also a good variation of all the teams being involved in there. I think the only team that wasn't involved would have been Todd Hazelwood. And then even over the podiums, we saw in the first race Chaz and Tom Randall, the second race also Chaz and Tom Randall, and the third race Cam Waters and Tom Randall. So some consistency there that they haven't seen at any race events this year, which is, well, it's fantastic no matter which way you look at it, and hopefully it's something that will continue over the next coming races. But there's one point I think this weekend that I think was nailed home, and it is Brodie Kosteki is the best racer in this championship at this point in time, and that is a fantastic thing to say. Over the last couple of years, we've had a few years dominated by Scott McLaughlin, then we've had a few years dominated by Shane Van Gisbergen, and as great as that is, it is fantastic to have a sniff of new blood in the water, with Feeney coming in, with Will Brown's emergence over the last couple of years, and then now Brodie Kosteki's emergence. It is fantastic to have that fresh blood. And of the 2 Erebus drivers coming into the season, I think he's probably caused a little bit of a surprise with just how consistent he has been this year. And all points of reference lead me to believe this. He has been where Will Brown has had enough poor qualifying performances to lead me to believe that he hasn't been as consistent as Brodie. We've seen the same thing with both Triple Eight drivers. Sometimes they qualify really well, and over the same event they'll qualify really poorly, which then puts them in the thick of it at the start of the race. They usually race through it and can snag a top 10, and sometimes even better. But it's not always so, and sometimes you do get caught up and you have problems. The same thing with Chaz and Walkinshaw. Also the same thing with Tickford and, well, mainly what has been Cam Waters over the year. But now with the emergence of Randall, hopefully that continues. But all these guys who we expect to be, the guys who challenge for a championship, as the new era has unfolded and teams are trying to get on top of this car, there's only one team and really one driver, even in that team, who consistently, has been pulling it out, over the year. And I think after this weekend, and rightly so, he has really grabbed the championship with, a bit more than a fistful, with over 100 points now between him and second place. And that is something that I think as a championship and as fans, we're going to have to come and reckon with, that Erebus and Brodie are here to stay and they're here to play. It has been probably not what we had expected, but the way that the team has adapted to this Gen 3 Camaro, and the way that Brodie has also adapted to this Gen 3 Camaro, has been better than everyone else. And that's not even mentioning the fact of this Ford parity. It's just in terms of the Camaros themselves, Brodie has been the best. And what is the easiest way to win a championship? It's to qualify well, and that's what, as we said before, what he has been doing. And And to say that it's probably unexpected, I think would be blind of all of us. And, this is including myself. I've never really taken the time to really estimate what we had in Brodie Kosteki. I've always probably brushed it under the rug. Even this year, I think I mentioned that Will Brown would be the lead driver of that team, and whether he's where he is, and I did not expect this from Brodie, but all the signs have been there. Last year he was fantastic. They had some weak weekends, and he got involved in a few incidents, but that was all part of the learning curve of a young driver. But coming into this year and looking at how how he has sort of finished his childish mistakes of that learning curve, he has come in and he's doing a job, and he's doing it fantastically. He has risen to every sort of fight and taken, he's pretty much bested every battle as well. He's had a few run-ins of SVG at the start of the year, but really he has stolen the wind out of SVG's NASCAR sales, I would have to say. Also for Tom Randall, I don't want to get lost on this. I think we sort of forget the struggle that Tom has had over the last couple of years, his fight with cancer, coming back, being in a team that has had one very good driver, but to get a second driver to be consistent like Cam has been a struggle. And I think Tickford in particular would really want him to be the driver to, to grab the bull by the horns. He is one of their junior drivers, just like Cam was. And to have this kind of weekend where, like he was saying in his press conferences, he was able to build from practice to qualifying, from qualifying to race, and keep a clear, race from the front. So he was always in the clear and was never involved in any silly shenanigans that happened down the back. And the ability to push on and, race with the big boys, I think that's going to give him a world of confidence. I think there's been a few questions asked of, how good can he really be, or can he really cut it at the front? I know I've asked those questions, and fairly or unfairly, that's just how his career has panned out. I think this has been a real marker in the ground, and I hope that he can really build some momentum from here. There have been whisperings about Tickford, downsizing their operation from 4 cars to 2 next year. Whether I don't know how much weight we should carry into the rumours, but there's a saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't think these conversations would, be leaking out if there wasn't maybe a mustard seed of truth in there. And I think if this is the case, it's important for whatever driver is going to seize the moment to do it now. And I think Randall realistically is probably in the best seat for that. For Declan Fraser hasn't really done much this season at all, unfortunately, as hard as it is to say. JC's been somewhat consistent. He's brought in he had a pretty decent weekend as well in 2 of the races, but he is on the older side as well, and I think that Randall has the biggest upside for that, out of those 3 drivers. So to see him put together a really strong weekend is fantastic. Other strong weekends, Penrite Racing, rookie Matt Payne, another Kiwi, banking 2 top 10 finishes, and Davey Reynolds getting 1, but also I think being hard done by in the 3rd race of this weekend to get penalised on the penultimate lap for contact between him and Brock Feeney. I think was a bit harsh, but as a team showing a lot better pace. Even if we want to say the Mustangs were particularly good this weekend, to even have more pace than the Dick Johnson team, I think goes a long way in terms of showing the strides that they're making. Interesting weekend as well for the team to be looking particularly good, and also sort of let us know that Davey Reynolds would not be racing there next year. But I think also that might correlate, because I think Matt Payne is showing that he has what it takes and isn't performing particularly worse, and in some cases better than Davey Reynolds. He's a young guy, he's got a lot of upside, and to bring in Stanaway is another guy for a lot of upside. I think we've seen what we're going to get from Davy Reynolds. Now, I think as good as he can have in some races, I think his best is probably behind him. I don't think he's going to be mounting any championship challenges, and I do think he is still, like he's always been, susceptible for a bit of a rogue moment, and I'm not sure if that has sort of burnt him as well with the team, but fantastic to see that. I love seeing that these middle teams having their moments in the sun. We saw it with Team 18 have had a win. We've seen it with Matt Stone Racing as well, and I know this is not a win, but you want teams to be feeling some momentum, especially going into the enduro season, and I think we really saw that from Penrite Racing this weekend. Also, WAU probably had the best weekend other than Tickford, I suppose, and it was awesome to see Nick Percat qualify well. He still had a few unfortunate moments, and some of them not his fault. He had a team pit stop as well that just was way too long. But to get a 4th place in the 3rd race this weekend, I think he raced really well in that race. He has unfortunately still been let go from next season. I don't think anyone can, question that. It just hasn't been good enough these last year and a half. I think he's got one podium. He performed pretty well at the Adelaide event last year, and then even at the Adelaide event this year. So he does perform well in his home state, and hopefully this can be a springboard for him to try and finish the season with some decent results to hopefully snag a ride for next year, or even if a ride doesn't climb, at least one of the better co-driving roles. I think those and Chaz got a 2nd in the first race, 3rd in the second race, and then to race back from 17th to 9th in race 23 was fantastic. Was a bit fortuitous as well with the Davidson and Feeney incident, which sort of promoted him 2 spots higher, but had a lot of pace and was able to cleanly race through the pack, which was fantastic. So really a great weekend for the Mustangs in general. We'll see how they build from this. There's 2 days of testing following this race weekend, and we'll see what comes from that in terms of building on the parity. But all in all, I think from all us Mustang fans this year, it was a weekend that most of us leave, or if you're at the track, leave happy, and if you're watching from home, feel satisfied. Like I said, Big Broads takes a commanding 100+ point lead from here, and although it is a sizable chunk of points, we are going into enduro season, and we see points unravel really quickly in enduro season. 300 points up for grabs at Bathurst, 300 points up for grabs at the Sandown 500, and then 150 at the Gold Coast on each of those races. It's a very, very unforgiving gauntlet of races. However, he and co-driver David Russell have been fantastic in the enduro races over the last 2 years. Just looking at it today before this podcast, they pocketed a 4th at Bathurst, and then a 7th and a 5th on the streets of the Gold Coast last year. And although Chaz and SVG probably performed better over the 3 races, strong performances like that are not going to lose you 150 so points. And I think going into these 3 race weekends, there's a month break. I'm not really happy with that. But as a team, with the confidence and the momentum that Erebus is building, they're going to go into those next 3 race events pretty confident that they have a driver lineup that can definitely challenge for race wins, challenge for high results, and the evidence is there from last year. I know Brodie mentioned David Russell in the press conference as well yesterday in terms of how good of a co-driver he was. He's got 2 days in the car this week, like all the other test drivers have, and really it's going to be important for all those drivers to try and learn as much as they can from the cars, for the teams to learn as much as they can, so that they can hit the ground running. It's a month break until Sandown, but what we've seen at most race weekends this year is that the teams that hit the ground running usually perform well for the whole weekend. Like the teams who rock up and the car is pretty close to where they want to run it don't usually lose that performance. It's the teams that are struggling when they get there usually struggle to actually find that performance. And then just looking at we'll probably leave that there on that, but then looking ahead to the future, I think one thing that this came to me just with the break that we have between now and Sandown, which is about a month. Cannot wait for next year adding 2 more events to this calendar, because a 4-week break leading into the enduro season I just feel is way too long. It is way too long for teams, probably not for the teams themselves, but for the sport to sort of have nothing going on. And also I think it's way too long for the fans, because whatever momentum you've built, that massive break just kills it. I mean, it's not like we have one in the middle of the year like the Formula One do when they have like their mid-season break. A 4-week break is unfortunately too common in this sport. So I came up with a few ideas that I know no one's going to listen to, but I thought I'd share them anyway, to make the schedule a little bit fuller and a little bit more competitive. I think first and foremost, the enduro season should be 4 races. We've got one in New South Wales, which is Bathurst. We've got Sandown, which is in Victoria. We've got the Gold Coast 600, which is in Queensland. And I think we should take one to New Zealand. I was thinking, should we have one in South Australia or Western Australia? And I probably thought probably not. The Adelaide 500 is a strong enough event anyway, and we already have 2 events in Adelaide as it is. But I think the people of New Zealand deserve 2 race weekends, no matter what. And if we're going there anyway, why not have one sprint round when we go to New Zealand, and then have a week off, and then do a endurance round to kick off the enduro season, and then when we come back Australia side, we can just continue from there. So we'll have a 2 or 3 week break, or probably 2-week break. But I think it's something that has to happen. There's too much New Zealand bloodline in the sport, and that too many drivers as well. Like there are so many of the good drivers are New Zealanders. Why would we rob that history from our sport and not give them their own endurance race that they can build a history for? The new track, which I said before was on the North Island, Taupo Motorsport Park, is I think a fantastic addition, but I still don't think it's enough. And what I would like to see is I'd like to see a track like Highlands Motorsport Park used, which is from the South Island. So we have one event from the North Island, one event from the South Island, whichever one you want to use as the track for the endurance event. I wouldn't be too fussed. Looking at it, I'd probably say Taupo might be a little bit better for that. We run an endurance race around a horse track, so both of those tracks have a bit more character than the Sandown 500 does, and that's still a fantastic race. I don't want to hear the issue that it's a monetary thing, that why we're not doing it, because I'm sure if you built it up properly, you could build it into an event that you would get your money back. We're trying to, as a sport, you're always trying to get new fans, and what better way to get new fans and build an event that is worth of a fan's attention, number one, and is going to grab the minds of young fans as well. Take a race to each island. It's not. I don't think that's a rocket science idea. And even if it wasn't to be a endurance race, I still think it's imperative that we have 2 races in New Zealand, if not 3. They've got so many awesome tracks out in New Zealand, better than some of the tracks we race on here. And to not utilise them, I think, is a crime. You've got Taupo, looks like an amazing track. I know Hampton Downs is an amazing track. Highlands is an amazing track. We need more race weekends as it is. It's that simple. So to reach more fans, why not take a second round there? We're already taking the circus there, and to take them there for 1 week doesn't seem to add up. So let's make it worthwhile going to New Zealand. I think over the coming weeks we're going to hear a bit more news about the silly season and how it unfolds. I would not be surprised if we got a few more driver moves nailed down before Sandown. I know that there's been whispers that the Walkinshaw seat is up between Ryan Wood, their Super 2 driver, and Fabian Coulthard. I personally would like to see Ryan Wood put in there. I just think that getting these young guys in, you're always gonna have growing pains. But when you look at the upside of, drivers like Matt Payne this year, we've seen, moments of, flashes of brilliance from Cam Hill. We, ironically enough, we saw Fullwood come into the championship a couple of years ago, and I think since his move to Brad Jones Racing, we've seen some real flashes of growth. So putting a few more of these young guys in there and giving them a chance, I think, is fantastic, and I hope that the steps that we do see is a bit more of that rather than recycling the drivers that are already in the championship. And I think as well we might see a little bit more movement or information about how the racing entitlements are going to be worked out. I think we'll get some ideas about what's happening with Tickford before Sandown as well. A month is a long time. I think we'll leave it there. So thanks once again for joining the Race Along podcast. Let me know if you like this solo format. I thought it would work well for getting out the information that we wanted without bickering and sort of losing points in our conversation. If you didn't enjoy it, like and subscribe. Keep subscribing on the YouTube channel because that's been growing quite consistently as of recently, and have a fantastic week.